Thank you very much, Morris. I'm really excited to be here. My name is Furaha Joy, and I lead a regional network called Africa Ends Sexual Harassment Initiative, AISHI. And we've been invited by our partner Flown Initiative to lead a session on this very important topic, Women in Transport in Africa conference. So we have a great team of panelists who are joining us, and we have four. Our first panelist is Victoria Idowu. Our second panelist is Maya Tuton. Our third panelist is Bossa Sebele, and our fourth panelist is Bashiratu Kamal. Victoria Idowu, our first panelist, is a journalist and a lawyer from Nigeria, but currently based in Canada. And she actually did an amazing documentary on women in transport in Nigeria. So she's going to take us through some of the challenges and opportunities for change on how women can, in the transport industry, can be empowered, and the challenges that face women in transport, the intersectional challenges. So she's going to share with us her presentation, and then the next presentation will be from Maya, and then I'll pick up some questions from there, and then I will then, this will take us to our third and our fourth presenters. So without any further ado, I am very excited to welcome our first panelist, Madam Victoria Idowu. Handing over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure being here, and I must say that being, having to sit with great minds is quite, it's a big deal. So I'll just go straight to it. And okay, so we have a system in Nigeria, Nigeria in context, where most of our transport system is dominated by the male folks. And the reason for that is because of the nature of the job. It's quite tasking, and it requires a lot of physical strength. It's in comparison to other countries, I haven't seen, well, in comparison to Canada, I should say, it's a jolly ride. You see other female drivers driving the buses and stuff, but in Nigeria, it's very tasking. You see young men hanging from the side of the buses. There's a lot of thuggery that's associated with transportation in Nigeria. It could be funny when you hear some certain types of slangs used by some of these people. And also another reason why it's usually male dominated is because the road network can be a bit that can have a level of mystery attached with it. It could be very cumbersome sometimes to walk through the process and drive through the Lagos roads. Traffic is not doesn't help also. So you have to have a level of expertise for a woman to decide that you want to go into the transport business. And usually it's the type of business, also the type of transport also is another issue. We have the car service, that's the regular taxi. We have the luxury service, which we call the Uber or the Bolt or Taxify, depending on the name. We have the interstates, that's the buses, and the majorly now the buses that go within the metropolis of each state, and depending on where you're going, it could be maybe you're moving from Lagos to another state. So we have those types of buses that apply those routes. There's the Hulage services, there's the tricycle, and there's what we call the motorbikes. In some parts of Nigeria, the tricycle, which we call the keke in Nigeria, is currently banned in some parts, especially like in Lagos. Motorbikes is the bikes, yeah? It's also a form of transportation in Nigeria, and some parts of Lagos has, some parts of Nigeria has also banned this forms of transportation because of the danger that it poses. But then you see lots of women, embark on this kind of journey and do this type of business. It's majorly, I think, from research and from the interviews that I have done in my, for instance, in the documentary that I put together, it's a quest to survive. You would rarely, out of every 10 men, you would probably see one woman going into the transport business, because it's really difficult to, to embark upon. But the quest to survive, the need to make something out of their lives is what drives a lot of women into this business. It's not a bad thing. It's good. It's because another reason why a lot of women go into this business is because, first of all, there is the notion that when you buy a car and you give a driver, or a bus, and you give a driver, there's something we call, some of you might not understand it, but what we call it in Nigeria is called deliver. Now, it's a parlance used to mean that money is paid back to the owner of the vehicle after a day's job, so that amount of money usually is predetermined before the ride starts, right? Before they embark on the journey, we usually say, okay, so for a 3-day period or a 1-week period, you're supposed to give me this particular amount of money. Let's assume in US dollars, let's say it's $100, because that's universal. We'll all understand what that is. So we're supposed to drop $100 for every trip, right? At the point where the bus drivers or the drivers are supposed to deliver that money, it never is complete. It's usually short of maybe $20 or $30. And it goes on like that. It keeps reducing, it keeps, dropping in price, dropping at every point. So women look at this thing, and if you have watched my documentary, you see where a woman said she took up the business by herself and realized that she was making a lot more than the agreed sum of money that was supposed to be made. So first of all, these guys, they cheat you, right? After cheating you, they tell you they can't deliver the amount of money that you have already pre-agreed, and they spoil your vehicles. So that's another reason why women go into this form of business. Also, it could be the death of the breadwinner. It's also for women empowerment. And a lot of them have the can-do spirit, because it is very rare to see a woman go into this form of business because of the nature of it. Now, what are some of the challenges they face when they go into this business? First, lack of inclusion. The men are very quick at segregating them. They put them on one side and insult them and say, go home and cook for your husband, or go home and, this is not where you're supposed to be. They say a lot of derogatory terms to them, and, things that do not encourage these women. Also, sometimes if they still have husbands, because most of them usually are not married. If they're married, the husbands are not with them. And a few of them that are still married and have children don't get the support from home that is required. So that's some of the challenges that they go through, because, women are not really seen in this business. So a husband doesn't want his wife to go into that kind of business for whatever reason. he decides or he thinks. Then there's a lot of embarrassment from road users because there's the thoughts that, what are you doing in this line of work? You should do something else. So allow your husband do this instead of you doing this. But women that are married and still have husbands, most of the time do it to augment what the husband is making, because there's a lot of economic challenges people go through. So the money is, tried to be made to augment whatever the husband is making. And also another challenge that they go through is passengers do not trust them, right? That's also an issue, because I would see, or a guy will see a driver and will think, I can't go into the car of a woman. I don't know if she knows how to drive. Women don't know how to drive. There's a notion in Nigeria that women don't know how to drive. Then also another challenge they go through is time management. Transportation in Nigeria is very tasking and time consuming, because a lot of money is made in transportation, a lot of money, especially when you do it yourself. So there's the ideology that I want to make so much money, but then how do I manage it? How do I manage my home? How do I manage my children? How do I manage my husband, while doing this kind of business? But then when you go through all of these challenges and you're able to wade through it, there is, like I said earlier, there's a lot of money in transportation business. There is a lot of money made, and eventually you'll get the support from the family members that you did not get initially. Like for one of the ladies that I spoke with, she said when she first started, her husband told her, don't do it. He doesn't want her to do it. Well, then she was very resilient and she went ahead and said she was going to do it. Eventually, he started to support her because she started making a lot of money. She started out with a hired vehicle. In about 3 months, she bought her own car that she was using for the Uber transportation business. And then, of course, with time, recognition from other road users, they begin to know you, they begin to respect your business, and they are eventually accepted by the other bus drivers and the bus conductors and traffic officials and the rest of them. Now, what are some of the things that you need to become a transport worker or a woman in the transport business? First of all, you have to desire it. It's not something that you stumble into because it has a lot of challenges, and most of the challenges are a bit psychological. And if you are not very strong and resilient and you're not tough, you might not be able to wade through all of those challenges because of the psychological effect that it has on your mind. And there's the power of your psychology and your mental health. So if you're not strong emotionally, you don't have the desire, you're not resilient, it might be a difficult water to wade through. So, of course, you have to know how to drive. That's sacrosanct. You have to know how to drive. You have to have a valid driver's license because of traffic officials. If they, if you're in the position whereby they have to stop your vehicle and ask you for your driver's license and you don't have it, that's a problem for you. So it's a major issue when you don't have a valid driver's license. You pay a fine, your car is impounded, a lot of things. So it is important that you have a driver's license. Also, of course, you can't drive without a vehicle. So you either have a bus or a car. And sometimes, because it's it can be very tasking and difficult to get a vehicle by yourself. You could, first of all, do a hire purchase and get someone to, trust you with their vehicles, and you probably pay off, or you do what is called, you deliver to them the certain amount of money that you're supposed to deliver. Then eventually you're able to buy your own vehicle at the end of the day. So the very last thing I should say is, what are the things you should consider before starting a transport business? the first thing is your source of capital, because you need the money to start. You need a vehicle, you need to have some money to commence the business. And so the first thing is the source of capital. Where are you going to get your money from? Are you going to go for a loan? Are you going to go for family loan or bank loan, or you save up? You need to consider your source of capital. You also need to consider the type of transport business you want to embark upon. Is it the bus? Is it the car? Is it a taxi? Is it interstate? Is it across states? You need to also consider the type of business, because each transport business has its own rules and regulations and its own challenges. So you need to consider that in, doing what you need to do. Then also the choice of the vehicle, the type of transport business will determine the choice of vehicle that you have to use. What are the regulations, what are the regulations that are in that business, in that choice that you have chosen? What regulations? You need to consider that. Is that something that you can wade through? Is it very tasking? Is it very challenging? Also, you have to get proper training. If you don't know how to drive, you have to know how to drive. If you know how to drive, you have to be trained on how the transport business works. It's not just to get a car or a bus and, put yourself on the road and start driving. You need to consider and get trained properly. If it's for you to just do a few weeks with a known driver and see how the business is run, consider the thuggery that's on the road, because there's a lot of thuggery attached with transportation. Boys on the road, the NURTW, the National Transport Workers Union are always on the road extorting money from these bus drivers. Are you able to, manage them properly? So you need to get trained and, be properly informed before you go into the business of transportation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Victoria, for that very informative package of information on women and transport in Nigeria. I think my key takeaway is that for sure you've emphasized that transport is indeed a business and a lucrative one that is obviously financially rewarding. But for women, there is an extra consideration. It's not just about the business model, but you have extra considerations, extra concerns that you have to take into account. For example, gender equality and sex discrimination. Those are real risks when you're considering the business of transport in Nigeria. So thank you so much. I'm now going to hand over to Maya. Maya is our second panelist, and we're so pleased to have her. She's the co-founder of Our Streets Now in the United Kingdom. Her and her sister have been doing incredible work, raising awareness about public safety on streets in the United Kingdom. And so she's going to share with us about her journey and what really triggered this and their experiences so far. So Maya, you're welcome.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me, and it's lovely to meet you all and share my perspective from the work that we've been doing in the UK. It's not as squarely focused on transport, although I'll go into that a bit later, and it will be focused more on experiences of users rather than people working in the transport industry, like Victoria was focused on. So let me just introduce Our Streets Now. So we are a campaign to end public sexual harassment. So by public sexual harassment, we refer to any unwanted sexual conduct in public space. So that could be on a public transport, in the street, in a bar, anywhere that the general public has access to. And the range of behaviors goes from really intrusive staring, making gestures, noises, all the way to physical assault. So it's any unwanted sexual conduct in public spaces. And this is incredibly prevalent in the UK, with a UN Women UK study finding that 97% of young women had experienced public sexual harassment in our country. So we have a big problem, and my sister and I wanted to change this. So we started the campaign in 2019, and at first we just had a petition and an Instagram. The petition is to make street harassment, public sexual harassment, a specific criminal offence, because currently we don't have the proper comprehensive legislation to tackle this issue in our country. We have amazingly nearly 500,000 signatures to that petition now, which is really exciting. And we were really inspired by countries across the world who were starting to introduce this legislation, particularly France and Belgium, but also places like Costa Rica. And really, we're seeing kind of a global wave of legislation being introduced to tackle this behavior, with 1 in 5 countries now having that legislation, and the majority of that having been introduced in the last 5 years. So as well as this, this legal campaign, we really wanted to create a community, because we wanted victims and survivors to feel heard and believed. And so we started our Instagram, and this is a place in which we share experiences of public sexual harassment. And these are often along gender-based lines, but they're also because of instances of homophobic harassment, racist harassment, Islamophobic harassment, and ableist harassment. So we really see that there is not one experience of public sexual harassment, and our organization aims to make public spaces safe for all. So we gained a lot of momentum in the first year, and at first it was just my sister and I, and we held protests and reclaimed some public space. But it was really when we moved on from that we formed a volunteer organization, and now Our Streets is made up of more than 50 volunteers, and our aims are twofold. So we split the work, both of continuing the legislation that I discussed earlier, of getting that specific offence, which we really believe will raise the bar in terms of declaring this behaviour unacceptable in our society, and ensuring that the behaviour in our society, that this negative behaviour stops happening, and that all individuals within the United Kingdom know that we cannot continue to have this problem. And then on the other hand, we also recognise that that work won't challenge the roots of the problem, which is gender inequality, and structural inequalities within our society. So we do work in education with young people, and what we really want to do is empower young people not only to not blame themselves when they are victims of harassment, and not only to not become perpetrators in the future, but also to get them to start thinking about the change they want to see. So we really believe in youth-led change. And when I started the petition, my sister was just 14. So we're a very youth-led organization that believe in the power of young people to change our society. And we do work all the way from secondary school up to higher education. And we have ambassadors across a number of UK universities who are calling for specific policy interventions. So that's the kind of broad spread of our campaign. In terms of transport, so like I said, Victoria gave us lots of insights into how being a provider of transport can lead to sexual harassment. But I think it's also the users themselves, right? So the figures for this in the UK are really disturbing, like you can see on the screen, with 16% of younger girls having experienced unwanted touching, which would obviously be categorized as sexual assault on public transport. And that rises to nearly 1 in 3 17 to 18-year-olds having been touched against their consent on our public transport. And this not only leads to them being victims of harassment, but it also changes their behavior. And so you can see in the second statistic that 14% of girls won't sit at the top of a bus or in an empty train or tube carriage. And what that means is that they do not feel empowered to exist in that space, and so that they are limiting their freedom and their mobility because of the sexual harassment they face. And we're really concerned about this. So we ran a survey with our followers to find out what do they think are some solutions. And you can see the results here. So things like emergency buttons on public transports and at transit stops, on-demand request stops, safer transportation options for night shift workers, because a big problem that we have in the UK is that, for instance, in London, the Tube recently has stopped providing a night service, which means that people who work at night then don't have safe transportation options to get home. And I think it's also really interesting to see how much people want posters and visible awareness campaigns on transport about male harassment not being accepted. And we've had some really exciting changes in the UK, actually, with the Rail Delivery Group, which is a national group of rail networks, launching a campaign supported by Transport for London. So that's really like a global reach campaign that aims to raise awareness about the problem of harassment on public transport and about the different reporting and support mechanisms that are in place. So that's kind of, in terms of transport, that's kind of what we've done so far. I know that that's a very specific UK focus, but I thought it might be interesting to know what we're doing. And like I said, this transport work ties into the educational work that we're doing and the legal campaign that we have. So yeah, I thought I'd just end by saying, you're welcome to join us. We always encourage people to start a conversation about sexual harassment and its impacts. You can sign our petition, follow us on our socials. And I just want to end by saying that, I think when it comes to harassment, we all have a role to play and we can all speak out about this problem. And obviously I've had a very UK focus, but I think, we can all relate to the feeling of not feeling safe on public transport. And I think that's something that we can all be allies in speaking out about. So yeah, again, just thank you very much for having me. And I look forward to some questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Maya. That was, wow, that was really exciting to hear about this youth-led initiative, this youth-led movement that is taking the UK by storm. And I think for me, as I listened to you, what I found really striking is that I was really able to draw very clear and obvious synergies between girls' safety and girls' concerns in the UK, even though you've emphasized that it's UK focused, but there are clear synergies that we can draw and place squarely within the African context that are so familiar. And that is just the fear of being in public spaces without proper security, and just the experiences of unwanted sexual advances in public transport spaces, unwanted touching, unwanted sexual advances that can, take even far more serious forms. So there is definitely room for more collaboration. And I think that the work that you're doing is so relevant to the work that we need to amplify and escalate in our African context. So that was Maya, our second panelist. I am now going to hand over to Bosa from Botswana. Bosa is a young lawyer in Botswana, and she's involved in a lot of regional initiatives that are very exciting with the youth as well. So her and Maya actually have that in common as well, youth-led initiatives. And yeah, she's she's active in the court, unlike some of us who are more on the research. But then she also has this passion and interest in issues around gender-based violence. So she's going to share with us a little bit about what's been happening in Botswana with women, transport, and safety. And I'm going to hand over to you, Bosa. You're welcome.
Thank you so much, Furaha. I'm really excited to be here today and just to share insights. Let me just share my screen. So yes, my presentation will essentially be based on really sexual harassment and the law. So I just wanted us to just fully get an in-depth idea of what the situation is in Africa in terms of just violence that is faced by women in society and where it stems from. So just to start out my presentation, I just want to speak to the problems or the gaps before I then delve into what could potentially be solutions to these issues that we face in Africa. So I think it may be common knowledge that our societies in Africa are highly patriarchal. There are issues of power. Let me just maximize that. There we go. Yes. So the majority of the issues that women face in Africa are that we come from societies that are highly patriarchal. Therefore, men see themselves as more superior to women who are then inferior. And it goes back to what Victoria was saying earlier on really the power or the power dynamics in terms of transport. Most men are seen as the drivers, they can go into the industry. So what now women face going into these male-dominated spaces, there's a lot of conflicts there. And even women that are using public transport now suffer or go through, they suffer and are subjected to sexual harassment. This is the norm, so to speak, in most African countries, Botswana included. And during the years or over the years, we've seen a lot of social movements. You know, I recall, I think Kenya, they had a hashtag, My Body, My Choice. Zimbabwe as well, there was an incident of a woman being stripped at a local bus rank. And they also, took to the streets and were marching, as well as in Botswana in 2017. Although it wasn't the first incident, it did spark a lot of conversations, and really women were furious. Of course, it's quite infuriating. If I can say so, it's quite infuriating because then we are not given the bodily autonomy that we I don't want to say seek, rather the bodily autonomy that we are to possess by the mere fact that we are human and these are our bodies. And already women are being policed, they're being subjected to sexual harassment, to verbal abuse, to insults, based on what they're wearing, based on their clothing. So there's already that fear that is incited by the power or the power dynamics, or rather the superiority and the patriarchy, and it was rather a difficult time. As I said, it wasn't the first incident. However, it did spark a lot of conversation and we wanted answers. We needed to be informed as to why it is still okay in our society today. So there was a march, civil society organizations, which have been rather key stakeholders really in protecting the rights of women, in also pushing for legislative and policy reform. They as well took to the streets and really voiced out the concerns regarding the safety of women using public transport. And another thing that just came to mind as well, in terms of public transport, our primary mode of transport would be your taxis, your minibuses, the buses that you use for long distances. And then there's private taxis, cabs are what they're called. So already there's also a safety issue with cabs because there's been numerous reports about women being raped in these cabs, because they're supposed to be registered with transport. However, most are literally just freelancers or just go around loading people at ranks at odd hours because people are desperate to get to where they want to go. Now they get into these vehicles not knowing this person's true intentions, and really tracking someone who's an unregistered vehicle, a transport, and someone who was not even supposed to be at the rank at that time to load passengers is also quite difficult. And as well as just the safety issue. You know, we don't have Uber, we don't have Taxify. So that also creates another safety issue, because with Uber, at least, you know, you can order your Uber and you know who's coming to get you. You have a picture of the individual and there's a record, essentially. So if anything was to happen to you, there would be that record at Uber, as opposed to the system that we have right now, where we don't have such services at our disposal. So essentially, those are the problems that we're facing. It's the sexual harassment, the stripping. Women are being stripped on the streets based on what they're wearing, which till today, I don't know. It still baffles me really why such discussions are had, because I think for me, it just goes to basic human decency and human respect, but it seems to be one of the biggest issues. So yes, now with the solutions. Now, in terms of solutions, you know, our laws in themselves as well have gaps. The extreme gaps in our laws. There are no strict laws, or there's no law that explicitly says that stripping women at a bus rank, or actually not even the bus rank, in public spaces, or just the very act of it should be legal or should be penalized in some way, in one way or the other. So what we now face is gaps in our laws that we need to also identify and work on. And this goes to now strategic drafting. I believe I'm a feminist, and if there's one thing that I'm always raving about, is how we always need to use the feminist perspective in our law, be it drafting our legislature, be it judgments, you know, when issuing judgments, there's always the need for a feminist perspective and or jurisprudence. And that's one of the things that I think we also need to bring in and say, okay, let's not draft things that are so open-ended, because it leaves room for different interpretations. And already we can see that it's a very big societal and cultural issue, because it stems back to what? Patriarchy. So we cannot afford to have laws that are now patriarchal, or they accommodate perpetrators. So one of the things that I believe is so critical, so critical, is the reviewing of our constitution. Our constitution dates back to independence, which is shocking. And because it dates back to independence, there isn't much that has changed. You know, we still there's a right to non-discrimination, there's a right to dignity. However, because we don't have second and third generation rights in our constitution, as I said, it leaves room for interpretation, or it leaves gaps already in our law. So one of the critical things that we also need to do as a country, and this also goes to other African countries as well, are to include our second and third generational rights. Most of our countries have, you know, ratified international instruments, your CEDAW. However, we don't see that in our domestic legislation. We don't see what you have agreed to we don't see it now being domesticated and then practiced on the ground, because there's also a very big disparity in terms of what's in our law books and what is on the ground. Police officers are unfortunately one of the they are the gatekeepers of patriarchy. I just want to say it that way, but really they are, essentially they are, because in terms of reporting, many women have said that they don't want to report because they get there and they're told, but you were not dressed appropriately, so what did you expect? So really, it's just one of those situations. So I believe the question today that we need to ask ourselves is, what do we as a collective believe needs to be done to progress Africa and protect women? And that is, yes, the end of my presentation, and I'll leave you with that question. What will you do to make a change? Thank you so much, Furaha. Back to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bosa, for that brilliant presentation. Clearly, you've identified what you believe are, the root causes of gender inequality and women's subjugation in Botswana and across Africa, and you've identified patriarchy as one root problem. And it's interesting that you have mentioned that the first known campaign was loud and vociferous and, claiming back women's rights. And this was the first known campaign, but it was not the first incident. So it means that there was so much silencing prior to this campaign, so many women who, suffered so much with the issue of public sexual harassment, and their stories never got the media scrutiny that is that they should actually get, and access to justice, obviously. And you've also identified challenges through the solutions, and you've mentioned that gaps in laws is a major problem. And just cutting across to what Maya's particular grievance is in the UK is the lack of legislative frameworks around the concept of public sexual harassment. And you've noted that as a specific impediment in the context of Botswana as well. So I'm pleased that we have now been joined by Bashiratu Kamal from Ghana. Bashiratu is a soldier not in the literal sense, but she is a real comrade in the movement for women's rights. She is a voice for trade unionists and equality of women in unions. And she also has a media background, and she's been very active and published widely on issues of gender-based violence. And she's going to give us her perspective of the challenges of women in transport in Ghana. So Bashiratu, welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you once again. And I am going to be speaking from the Ghanaian perspective. And some of the words might be local, but I'll try and put it in a context where each one of us can identify with the different names that we use for some of the means of transport here. So Furaha has already spoken about who I am and what I do and all of that, so I will just skip that. On the lighter note, that is my real face that you are seeing on the screen. So by way of introduction, in Ghana, we have different means of public transport, just like most African countries. And in recent times, other means of public transportation has become very easily accessible. It's cheaper and it's faster. cheaper and faster, like Okada, and the yellow one you see, we call it Pragya or Mahama Kandu, which started around, it's been like 5 years now since it came to Ghana. And for those types of vehicles, we do not have them all over the country. So they are very common in some parts of the country and are not. And with Okada, which is the motorcycle type of transportation, they are operating illegally, if I must put it that way. Also because government is still not certain that they want to allow its usage by citizens, because according to them, they did not consider them when they were making our roads. And the fact that they said they cause a lot of road accidents as well. And then we have taxis, we have other means of transport, which is the Ovan, or what we call popularly 207. And then we have what they will call in Nigeria Danfo as well here. And in Ghana, let me say that when it comes to public transport and exposure to sexual harassment and violence, it's very common. It's very common, but unfortunately, because of the way we have normalized some of the acts and some of the toxic narratives, and because of how women do not even own autonomy over their own bodies, it becomes even difficult for people to complain or talk about it as well. And then for long journey, we have other means of transport that is used. And for those ones, we have some of these types of buses and what we call the VIP buses, which is the Giant bus. But let me put it that none of these vehicles, in fact, most of them, they belong to the union we call GPRTU, Ghana Private Road Transport Workers Union. But they do not have any policy or anything when it comes to sexual harassment or violence or assault or anything of the sort. GPRTU itself is informal big time, so they themselves do not have structured system like the former workplaces that we have. So we also have what we call the Trusky, which is very common. So the Trusky is like this one, the Ovan and the Caravan type, the Ovan type and the Sprinter type of buses. And it's very common and very cheap and easily accessible. So you almost always find Trusky around town. And it's once you get to a bus stop, you definitely find Trusky going to a place where you can access, or a place where it's easy for you to get. And it's very cheap and affordable too, like I mentioned earlier. And then, like I mentioned, we have the taxi, we have the Mahama Kandu, and then we have other long distance buses. And then we have the platform drivers, like we have Uber, we have Bolt, we have Yango, we have Taxify, and there's another one. And of course, these ones are more with the middle class people, because you need to be using a sophisticated phone that can take data and use the internet before you can use them. And these, at least for now, people who use this sort of transport can read and write. And also there are spaces where after your trip you can always report any type of assault, at least to authority, for them to take action, whether it's violence, whether it's harassment of any form. And they also have it on their app, so you can click on it to report any cases, unlike the other means of transport where you don't even know the owner of the vehicle in the first place to go and report. And some of them do not even have any station where you can go back to the station to report to a union leader or someone. So it's just you, the driver, and who we call the mate, who is the conductor of the vehicle as well. Then some of the challenges that Ghanaians generally face, let me say this, that in Ghana, about 7-8 years ago, there was a policy, and the policy was from the Ministry of Transport, that instead of taking 4 passengers on a row, they should start taking 3. So they asked that the drivers take out 1 seat, so that one, to afford people having more spaces in the car, so people don't rub themselves against each other in ways that were offensive, and people do not take advantage of that to harass people in the vehicles. In fact, it worked just for some few months, and then they went back to normal. So they started picking the numbers again. And last year when COVID struck, they went back to taking one person from the vehicle because of social distancing. But those are not working again. And when it comes to challenges that we have with regards to SGBV, mostly it has to do with spaces, touching and squeezing, where someone will try or say that they are taking money in their pockets, from their pocket to pay their fare. And all you see is someone, their hands rubbing your breast, or squeezing you, and someone touching your thighs and squeezing you in ways that makes you uncomfortable. And when you try to complain, the person is like, I'm taking money out of my pocket, there's no other way I can do it. And if you complain, the most annoying thing they keep telling us is, then go and buy your own car, or go and hire a taxi, or take an Uber. Don't come and disturb us in this public transport. And it's a thing. And drivers, some of the drivers also do this when they are changing gears. So if you happen to sit in the front row and there's two of you, and you have to squeeze yourself, driver will be changing gears, and all you would see is someone's hand rubbing your tie, or someone actually rubbing you with the gear, and then you dare not complain, because they'll tell you that they have no control over that. So you have to live with it. Now, most of the vehicles are rickety. I mean, it's extremely bad. So you are also protecting yourself against any form of injury, that no one will be responsible for if it happens to you. So you have to, as it were, keep quiet and suffer. And some of these spaces allow for different types of abuses. Like, you see holes in the seats, and then you can feel somebody's knee pushing your butt, and you can't even complain about it. It's very stressful. Then we have a huge lightning system in most of the public transport, especially the Trotsky and the taxis at night. So what normally happens is, when the drivers pick passengers and they move, they'll put the lights on for the maids to start taking the fares. Then once the maid is done taking the fares, the next thing is the driver will put off the light again. So the whole vehicle becomes dark until someone says, I want to alight at this bus stop. Then the driver puts on the light for the person to alight, and they put it off again. So a lot of things do happen in vehicles like this. About a month ago, a colleague reported that in one of the vehicles that they were sitting in, there was this fair lady sitting in front, and there was this guy sitting behind her. So there was some space at the back. And this guy was just admiring the lady's waistline, And the next thing, when the mate put on the light for someone to alight, the lady sitting next to him noticed that he was actually masturbating in the vehicle. And it was that nasty. So the lady screamed, and the driver, everyone was like, what is happening? And the guy tried to hide it, but it was late, because he had actually released sperms onto all his trousers and everything, so it was visible, And they had to get him off the vehicle, hoot at him and beat him, and they left him there and went their way as well. Then there are issues also around toxic narrative, use of vulgar languages or abusive words, especially if you're a woman, where someone can tell you, your mother, which man will marry you, woman with smelly vagina, nobody wants you, prostitute, just because you probably asked that something is not right in the vehicle or something. Then most of these vehicles, if you have to pick them, especially at the station, where is the bus stop for all of them, where they park the cars, you go there, and in especially rush hour during the early mornings or late evening after work, you have to queue before you pick the transport. So in the course of queuing, people do nasty things, including holding you inappropriately, I mean, telling you to move forward, and then someone just coming close to your butt, and all of that. I have witnessed a case myself at one of the stations where someone was slapped by a stranger who was just passing, because the stranger had noticed that he was behaving in an unusual way, like he was actually having sex with the other lady in front of him. And when they dragged him from the line, they noticed that he was actually, he had ejaculated, and they beat him to pulp at that station for doing that. And it happens a lot of times. And also, especially also at rush hours, when some of the vehicles, especially at some bus stop, you are late for work, a vehicle comes, everyone is rushing to go and pick it. So everyone wants a way to get in. And through that process, someone can just squeeze your breast, touch you inappropriately. A lot of theft happens around that time too. If you don't hold your bag well, someone will pickpocket and all of that. And also people will just hit your butts freely, because they will tell you, we are all struggling, so it's not my fault, and it wasn't intentional as well. So these are some of the challenges that we have. But let me briefly say that quite recently, most of the activists have started engaging some drivers and maids on some of these issues. And I remember recently Action Aid decided to start giving out flyers around sexual harassment, so that they can start posting them in their vehicles as an educative tool. And also it's important, like, we have these Christians and other people of other faiths who will go into vehicles to be preaching, so we are also considering that as another way, so that when we just sit in the public transport and get up and educate people about sexual harassment and other issues and how they can protect themselves, then collaborate with the unions, the transport unions as well, to engage on these issues and to help them on how we can educate their drivers so that they can better protect the passengers, especially the women passengers as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bashiratu. That was at some parts of your presentation, it really became difficult to really comprehend and understand, but it really just highlighted the challenges that women in transport face as users primarily, is the angle that is the core part of your presentation. And it's clear that the kind of spaces, the kind of structures that these transport commuters are made of create opportunities for sexual predators. The closed spaces where there's so much little physical space create opportunities for sexual predators to take advantage of women in particular. And it's really tragic, but there is hope that at least they've begun to be responses by activists to create more awareness. But really, it just seems as if the case of Ghana and the experiences of women in public spaces and public transport resonates with all the other speakers here as well, in that there really seems to be, almost like a kind of impunity. I mean, where are the arrests? Where are the charges? Where is the prosecution process when these kinds of behaviors are happening in public spaces? So it seems as if there's almost like a green card to be sexually inappropriate in public spaces, because there seems to be lack of accountability. And so the perpetrators continue with that kind of behavior. So all our presenters have spoken, and I think that we are more enlightened about what is the situation in our different contexts. what I'm going to do is just ask each one of you a very specific question that you can respond to. And then I'd really like to give you as panelists an opportunity to ask questions of each other, because I think that some of the presentations and the issues raised have been very thought-provoking, and that they are really clear opportunities for synchronizing some of the efforts and amplifying the work that is being done by each of the panelists here, including our host, Flown Initiative. So Victoria, I'm curious to know, because I didn't pick that up in your presentation, because you raised the issue of transport and more from women as part of the business model of the transport system in Nigeria. Has the government done anything to provide interventions to empower women specifically in transport in Nigeria? Because women clearly have gendered consequences if they choose to go into this kind of business. So are there efforts by the government to intervene and ensure that the gendered concerns of women in transport are met?
Yeah, thanks for the question. First of all, it's a no, and it's a yes. Okay, so because different states have different policies that apply to women in business generally. A few states have taken up the, not holistically, so to say, but what they do is they are a bit more lenient with women when it comes to adhering to certain rules, because they are so minute, you rarely see a lot of them. So what you see is, what some states, what they do is give some leeway to women in tackling some issues when it comes to payment of certain fees. They give them some leverage when it comes to, but on a general note, the same rule that applies to the man applies to the women. It's really not, there's really no difference in how they're handled. It's just a few states have just handpicked each other and provided some loan, some benefits, and some minute areas where they can, attend to this, to the needs of the women, but holistically, it's the same rules.
And my next question is for you. And you've mentioned that one of your goals as a campaign, as a movement, is to make sure that public sexual harassment is framed as a specific criminal offense, because currently it's not. And my question is around the terminology of public sexual harassment, and whether that terminology on its own could possibly provide a kind of like escape for more serious offenses. Would it not be more comprehensive, more encompassing, if you were looking at framing this as public sexual misconduct as opposed to public sexual harassment?
That's an interesting question. I think for us, we use the term public sexual harassment because of the legislative framework that we have. So there's a Protection from Harassment Act, and the language of sexual harassment is just quite embedded in the way that we understand this behavior. And I think it's perhaps like a more, so the reason that we really use the term public sexual harassment is because we really wanted to tie it to workplace sexual harassment and make the point that we have incredibly strong laws. Obviously, it's the same as what Bosa said in terms of it's one thing in the law and it's another thing in practice. But legislatively speaking, we do have some strong interventions around workplace sexual harassment. And the point that we're making is what we're asking for is that same protection outside in public space. So for us, it was really important to use the term sexual harassment because it ties that behavior to what's happening in the workplace, and kind of really what we're trying to do is both make that point from a legal standpoint, but also change cultural values. Because I think a big problem in our society is just, people think, we have the term wolf whistling and people think it's a bit of fun and it's a compliment. And a lot of what we're trying to say is, no, this is really, really scary behavior that has like lifelong impacts, at times on victims. And so for us, public sexual harassment was the term that our followers chose and voted for, and that they believe that this term kind of better represented what was happening to us in public space than terms like catcalling, for example, or wolf whistling, which, whilst they do talk about one type of public sexual harassment, they don't encompass the broader experience, and they don't kind of label it as a distinct offence which can and should be recognised and then prosecuted.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. Also, my next question goes to you, and just leaning more into the issue of cultural change that Maya has continues to raise, and you've identified patriarchy and unhealthy patriarchal norms as a root cause. Will that change with amendments to the Constitution, for example? What is your bigger problem? Is it constitutional change, or is it unhealthy patriarchal norms?
Right. Thank you for the question, Raha. So with that, really, I can't say there's one answer to your question. Really, it's a bit of both. We can't have one without the other. Yes, definitely constitutional change will then create, there's this thing, if you can't name it, you can't change it. Yeah, essentially that's it. If you can't name something, then you can't change it. If it's not there in the Constitution, then what exactly are we going to be using as authority for that change, or for that thing that we want to change? And then it also goes back to, but of course, we can have the one side, constitutional change. However, if the society itself is now very highly cultural, because we do acknowledge that today, that it's mostly culture. It's mostly culture, and we now have to make change at the grassroots level, at the societal level, in our communities. Now, these are people that your ordinary Motswana in the village wouldn't know what, even if we to change the Constitution, he wouldn't know what you're changing, what this law is saying, until you bring it to him and explain it. So it has to be sort of like a synergy. It has to be a process where we change the Constitution, but at the same time, simultaneously, we also educate your ordinary Motswana and really just impact that knowledge. Because I think that's also one of the fundamental issues, is that there are laws in place, but we don't know what they mean. We don't know how they protect us. We don't know how they can assist us in any way. So yeah, so that's basically my answer, Raha. I can't give you an exact answer and say, I'd say this over the other. It just goes together.
Okay, my final question goes to Bashiratu. Bashiratu, you mentioned the responses by the taxi drivers when you have the encounters of sexual harassment and sexual misconduct cases in public transport, that often there's a response of go and buy your own car, and that's really rooted in callousness, ignorance, and impunity, and so something in my view, something a little bit more is required to address, these kinds of attitudes. And you've mentioned, for example, driving, in public transport with the lights off, so it's dark, and that's an opportunity. The close spaces where people are close together, and that's an opportunity for unwelcome touching, etc. And so activists, you've mentioned that there's positive movement for activists to intervene and say, look, we need to educate people. But don't you think something more than education is required right now? Don't you think that the full force of the law actually has to be experienced? But does the law adequately address these issues of sexual harassment and sexual misconduct?
Yes, Furaha, thank you. So, the Criminal Code of 1960 Act 29 actually makes provision for a person to report cases and also take action in the case of an indecent assault. And also, when there is a case of sexual offense of any kind as well, and also in terms of battery or actual battery. But unfortunately, I mean, there's a difference between not knowing the law at all and knowing the law and not knowing who to go to or who to report to as well. And truth is that a lot of people do not really have any confidence in the system, believing that if they report cases, someone will help them or they will get the justice that they deserve. So that in itself is also very frustrating, and I'm not sure someone who works, let me say, hand to mouth, who will have to go struggle by the day to get what they will eat, will want to be going to the police station every now and then, every single day, just to follow up on a case that happened in a public transport. So we need to let people believe in the system and also do more education about the existence of some of these legislation for the public to know and to actually use it. Should there be a case of harassment or indecent assault of any form. And also, we have a Labor Act. Unfortunately, the Labor Act just protects those in the formal sector and neglects everyone in the informal sector, which in itself is also very problematic. So it's difficult to extend that protection using that particular law, which is the Labor Act itself as well. So what it offers all of us to use, devoid of your status as a Ghanaian, is a Criminal Code or Criminal Offences Act. Apart from that, even that, how many of the elite know about the existence of some of the clauses that are enshrined in the act itself? It's not things that people know about indecent assault. And like I mentioned earlier, these things have been normalized in our society. So you attempt complaining, and another person might even tell you that you are not the first it will happen to, and you are not the last it will happen to anyway. There will be more after you. So you just pick the car and go your way as well. What we've not had is our maybe transport ministry, taking stern action against some of these things, and the transport ministry itself being joining the crusade. Like tomorrow begins 16 days. If we have a transport ministry that goes from station to station, talking about these issues and advocating and doing sensitization around these issues from station to station, it's going to bring about a lot of change, and if they start interacting with both passengers and drivers and other users, I'm sure people can outline and catalog some of the issues they face, and then we would see how we can respond to that together as stakeholders. But without the transport ministry also taking an initiative like that, it's going to be difficult. There have been a lot of push from civil society and unions and other groups to get government to get a national sexual harassment policy, which if we succeed with, will also by extension, cover everyone, devoid of their status as well. What is important is that you are a Ghanaian and you need to be protected in this space as well. I mean, I've had an experience where in a vehicle once about 2 years ago where someone came to pick a vehicle, and the next thing we heard was one of the passengers accusing the person to be gay, and everyone was on that person. It was that nasty. If I didn't intervene, they would have beaten the gentleman, just by his appearance and looks. And this was in a public transport where you have people who will be behaving like they are Jesus Christ or they are the prophets in themselves, trying to pass judgment and to get someone assaulted. But nobody will actually consider supporting that person, because in their eyes, the person is engaging in an act they think is unholy.
Okay. All right. So thank you so much. Thank you so much, Bashi, for that, for those comments. Because of time, we now have to wrap up, but I'd like to ask one of you, if you have a burning question that you have for one of the other panelists, this is your time to make a concluding remark or ask a question in less than a minute. Anybody want to take that?
I don't have a question, but I just want to reiterate what Bashiratu said about sexual harassment and its in context to the Nigerian society. I would just say that practically everything she said as regards Ghana is what applies also in Nigeria. There are several times people have been accused of, sexual harassment in the bus, in vehicles, touching. It was just an exact replica. I was just smiling while she was talking. It's just an exact replica of what people face also as regards sexual harassment in Nigeria. That's what I just wanted to say.